I was watching a YouTube video where the YouTuber tells let's not meet stories of weird encounters with landlords or in hostels. Reminded me of this one that happened to me a few months ago. Disclaimer: that might not be as scary as other stories in the subreddit, but watching those videos made me paranoid, which is why I decided to leave the Airbnb rather than risk being the victim in a true crime story. As I said, this happened a few months ago. If I remember correctly, in January or February of 2024, I was visiting family in southern France and did not want to stay at their place even if they offered for personal reasons which I won't share here. Note that I visit them quite often and usually last minute, so I would never book the same place, and I would sometimes book a hotel room which is more expensive but better for me, as I don't necessarily want to socialize with the hosts. Even when I would book Airbnbs, I would always search flats or studio flats and not a room in a flat/house where other people live, as I want to be on my own, so this is an important criteria for me. So I booked this Airbnb within walking distance of where my family members stay, and it looks very nice on paper. I think it was marketed as a house or ground floor flat with access to a yard and a garden. It was probably one of the cheaper options. I don't remember for sure, but I wasn't going there for leisure or planning to have a very nice place for myself to have an enjoyable holidays, if that makes sense. So I really wanted something for convenience and wouldn't pay extra for any kind of luxury. There were not a lot of reviews, but the one was pretty positive. So I go to that place with my suitcase waiting in front of the house. I contacted the landlord, who should give me the keys, but he's late. I spent at least 1 hour waiting outside, and I'm trying to be patient, realizing at least the neighborhood is pretty nice and seems safe, even if I need to walk through areas that are slightly dodgy to get there from where my relatives stay. The landlord finally arrives. He seems like a good man and apologizes profusely, saying he was in another town visiting his cousin or friends, and time flew by. First, red flag: he says they were drinking and didn't have time to sober up, so he had to speed on the highway on his motorbike while being tipsy/drunk. He stops and asks me half-jokingly not to say that in my review. I get a bit serious and tell him that he shouldn't drink and drive, but he says he really didn't want to make me wait further. I tell him I won't flag that in my review. Spoiler alert, I will, but didn't want to start off on the wrong foot. The guy is nice otherwise and seems trustworthy, very chatty and open to socializing, and frankly, I was just happy I could finally get in and drop my stuff. Second, red flag is when he tells me I will be living in a small flat adjacent to the bigger house he lives in, but I shouldn't worry because I would have my own place, own bathroom, own kitchen, etc. I don't like that too much, but I actually think it might be good because I'm not super comfortable being on my own in a ground floor accommodation, knowing anyone can get into the yard and access the front door. Again, I'm paranoid, so knowing that someone I know is close by in case something happens gives me a sense of safety. God, was I wrong? He shows me around, all seems okay. It's pretty old, but as I said, I wasn't looking for a luxury stay. The part where I would stay is on the lower level than a street view level. Not exactly like a basement because there's access to a garden, but I need to walk down a set of stairs outside and get into a flat through the backyard. This shows mostly when I'm in the bedroom, as I see through the windows that it's clearly at a lower level. Next red flag, or rather yellow flag, is when he shows me a door close to the bedroom, which is connecting door between my part and his house. I was kind of expecting that, but thought he might need to at least cross the yard or access through the front door to get into my part of the house. He says this door stays closed and it's locked anyway, not as a warning for me not to try and open it, but more like, you'll notice there's this door, it's useless for you, and what's beyond it is not part of what you're renting. We chat a little bit, too long for my taste because I was tired and also still annoyed at his lateness and not in the mood to socialize. He gives me his phone number because Airbnb chat feature is not good, it's easier to use WhatsApp, and then he leaves. I start to settle down, open my suitcase and get changed before leaving to visit my family. I then go back to the place in the evening and decide to have a shower. If I remember correctly, what I'm saying next happened before I took a shower because I remember locking the bathroom door, which I never do when I know I'm on my own, and I recall being quite anxious when getting the shower. So, biggest red flag before the last drop, I'm sitting on the bed and hear a knock and someone saying my name. 2 seconds later, before I get the chance to answer or even understand where the noise comes from, I hear keys turning in and lock in a door opening. As you might have guessed, it's the connecting door next to the bedroom. The guy enters and says he can't find his phone, and if he might have left it downstairs. I'm a bit shocked, probably because if he had come down 10 minutes later I would have probably been naked, ready to take a shower, or maybe walking around in a towel since I'm supposedly alone. I know it might sound like I'm a pussy, but keep in mind I'm a relatively young woman, alone in the house with a man in his 40s or 50s who has control over when he can get into my place at any time. I stay polite and try to tell him that no, I haven't seen his phone. I would have noticed there's literally nothing except my open suitcase on a couch in the bedroom. He still gets in, speaking a lot and very fast while I'm sitting there, not fully realizing what's happening and not having a chance to tell him to leave. He looks around the flat and obviously doesn't find the phone. Then he says sorry and probably asks if everything's fine, if I had dinner or something like that, and then leaves again. At that point I'm really wondering if I should stay or not, since I know you get refunded only if you cancel 2 nights in advance. I just thought I would lose the money for the night that had started. It was already around 11 p.m. in the following one, knowing I had booked at least 4 nights. I really needed to take a shower, but questioning if I should. I try to see if there are any available hotel rooms, but it's already too late to book or already fully booked. I decide to take my shower real quick, wondering if he could hear the shower and decide that he forgot something else to get in again. But nothing bad happens. I then go back to the bedroom, get dressed as fast as I can just in case, sit down and think. I decide that I will just stay for the night, and I'll probably be less paranoid in the morning if I'm still alive. That's when I noticed the chairs in the bedroom. There are 2, and one of them has ropes tied around the armrest. The chairs are in good shape, and the rope is definitely not there to keep the armrest fixed to the chair, as they are just loose. To this day I have no idea why they were there. I still think I should sleep there just for the night and try to use a chair to block the door handle in the bedroom, like in the movies, but guys, this only works in the movies. I try with both chairs, trying to pile them up, even trying to use the ropes one way or another. The handle can still go down enough to open the door easily. I think that at least if I leave them in front of the door, I'll hear if someone tries to open it, but the door opens the other way, and in any case I don't know what I'd do even if the noise woke me up. Again, I'm paranoid and anxious and living alone, abroad. My motto is to never ever take risks for my own safety, as I'm usually the only one who can save myself, so better avoid any tricky situation. Doesn't mean I never go out, but I wouldn't get drunk around people I don't trust, and I would take a cab if I feel unsafe going home on my own after midnight. I now live in a city that's rather safe, but too many bad encounters. Unfortunately, nothing unusual for most women not to be careful. So from an external point of view, this is a story about someone booking in the Airbnb with good reviews, with a nice and friendly landlord who is just overly open because he likes to meet new people. And the ropes are just a detail, but for my anxious and paranoid self, it's the premise for a horror story or thriller where you shout at the stupid and trusting victim to get away ASAP before the guy comes back. So I decided to call my brother, who came to pick me up around midnight, for me to spend the rest of my stay at his place. Country road. A few weeks ago I was driving in the middle of nowhere, heading to one of my friends. My wife was sleeping next to me, while my teenage daughters were watching a movie in the back. Next to them my toddler was playing with his toys. It was around 1 a.m. and I was nervous as the drive there seemed to last forever. The dirt roads with no lights gave me chills, as all I could see around were only fields. The road had many holes and I was trying to avoid them as much as I could. I was very focused on that when I saw in front of my car a luggage. It was in the middle of the road, on my side. On the other side a car was parked facing us. The car was completely in the dark as there were no lights inside or outside of it. I did not want to drive over the luggage, so my first instinct was to go out and move it. I was lucky to have my wife with me. She grabbed my hand and indicated me something on the right. One person was in the field, looking at something on his phone, reason for which my wife saw him in the first place. I turned my car around and was ready to leave this road where 2 people jumped out in front of us from the field. There was no space on the road, so I couldn't go without harming them. 2 people were in front of my car, 1 luggage, a car, and the person checking their phone in the field were behind us. I did not know what to do, so I did the only thing that I thought of. I just turned around again, facing the luggage, and just drove over it. Fortunately, there was nothing inside it to damage my car, so we got out of the situation completely unharmed. We arrived at my friend's house and everything was perfect and we had a great time there. However, I still have chills when I had been thinking about this incident, so people from the field, let's not meet again. Goat Canyon Trestle. In late fall of 2010, my dad, mom, sister, uncle and I decided to try and hike to the Goat Canyon Trestle, located deep in the desert of San Diego County in Southern California near the Mexico border. The trestle is basically a very tall bridge-like structure made entirely of wooden beams and columns that was built with the railroad in the early 1900s. The railroad is now decommissioned and the tracks, bridges and tunnels are all abandoned. There is a lot of good and interesting information about the trestle online if you are interested. It is allegedly one of the tallest freestanding wooden structures in the world. I believe now there's a lot more information on how to hike out to the trestle online, but back in 2010 there was very limited information about it, and you really had to search deep to get information on where to start and the route to take. My uncle was super into these remote abandoned locations at the time, and it was his hobby to research and plan out how to get to them. There was no dedicated trail at the time to the trestle. I'm not sure if there is even one today, and you had to do more or less make your own path across the rocky desert hills. I was a sophomore in college at the time, and we were all decided it would be best to do the hiking over Thanksgiving weekend when me and my sister would be in town for the holidays, and it would be cool enough temperatures to attempt. When we got to the location where we parked our car, it was pretty barren and out in the middle of nowhere with desert all around. My uncle told us we would have to hike up into the hills ahead of us and then down the other side through a canyon that led to the trestle. It's this canyon that the trestle traverses. The hike started off without incident, but the lack of a dedicated trail soon made it difficult. The terrain was very rocky with loose slate rocks that were lined with sand and made you slip and fall easily. Within the first few hours I had fallen and scraped my knees and hands several times. It was a lot of scrambling over rocks to get up into the hills, and it took us much longer and a lot more effort than we expected. We probably started the hike around 9 or 10 a.m., but by the time we reached the top of the hills it was already mid-afternoon, and we still had to traverse down the canyon on the other side of the trestle, and then walk all the way back to the car. Recall that it was around Thanksgiving time and the sun would set around 5 p.m. My mom and dad were naturally worried that we didn't have enough daylight to make it back to the trestle and back, and thought that we should start heading back to my car. But my uncle really wanted to at least see the trestle from the top of the canyon and said he would go on ahead alone while we went back. Being the young, invisible-minded male I was at the time, I convinced my parents to let me go with my uncle. My uncle and I were much faster hikers than my parents and sister, and we were sure we could make it through the trestle and back with enough light. We parted ways, and my uncle and I continued into the hills towards the canyon. And this is where things started getting very strange. I want to take a moment to explain a little about the area for those who might not be familiar. As I said above, the trestle is located relatively close to the Mexico border, along with the abandoned tracks running between Yuma, Arizona and San Diego, California, more or less paralleling the Mexican border. This area at the time was well known to be a very active route for illegal immigrants crossing into the United States from Mexico. There were stories online that my uncle found that said people would hide in their abandoned train tunnels to escape the Border Patrol officers during the day and would then walk the abandoned tracks at night. Border Patrol was also very active in the area at the time. It was also a hot spot for coyotes and mules, not the animals but individuals who help escort immigrants into the country and individuals who are transporting illegal drugs. Getting back to the story, my uncle and I continued to the hills in search of the canyon that led down to the trestle. After we had been walking for a while, we came across a small grove of fan palms. If you're not familiar with fan palms, they're basically a shorter and stockier version of a typical palm tree with a lot of palm fronds arranged down the trunk of the tree, such that the actual trunk can't be seen behind all the fronds. The palms in this grove are all relatively short, ranging maybe from 8 to 10 feet tall, and the fronds dropped all the way to the base of the tree. I remember it was a little creepy coming across the grove in the middle of the hills. It felt like something was beyond the thick layer of palm fronds watching us, and I would be lying if I wasn't a bit relieved when we continued past them. Eventually my uncle and I found the canyon that we thought led down from the hills of the trestle. The canyon was very rugged with tons of loose rock. You can only imagine how difficult it was trying to go down it, slipping and sliding over the rocks the whole way. Once we were about halfway down, the sun was just starting to set, and that eerie quietness that comes with sunsets in the desert washed over the canyon. It was also starting to get cold, with the sun dipping below the hills, covering the canyon in shadows. It was around this time that both my uncle and I started seeing things. We both swear we saw my mom at the top of the canyon, looking down at us. My uncle joked with me that my mom would never let me go on alone and she must have followed us. We continued down the canyon some more, and when we looked back up there was no one there. We thought maybe she had just walked behind some rocks or something and began calling out to her from below. There was no response. I admit I was a little freaked out then and told my uncle we should start heading back, but my uncle wanted to keep going and insisted that we must be close. He was right. Around the next few bends we saw the trestle ahead of us. It was very cool to see, but we still had a good way down the canyon to actually get to the base of it, let alone climb to the top of it, which was our original plan. My uncle, being the crazy adventurous guy he is, insisted we keep going, but as we were heading down further I stumbled and sprained my ankle very badly, and I decided that I couldn't go any further down. My uncle finally agreed and said he would just go alone a little way further to get some pictures and then we would turn around and head back together. So there I was, sitting alone in this canyon that was getting darker and darker by the minute, trying to mend my twisted ankle when I looked back up the canyon to see if my mom was visible again. I didn't see anything initially, but something large moved out of the corner of my eye up the canyon sun, like it was darting between a rock. This freaked me out and I felt a sense of dread wash over me, like I was being watched from every shadow. I remember it was so quiet, it felt unnatural. A little while longer my uncle returned, and we began to make our way back up the canyon. It was very dark at this point, and just a glimmer of sunset was left on the horizon. I was really starting to freak out because I knew we would be walking back in pitch black. When we were almost at the top of the canyon, my uncle, who was walking ahead of me, stopped in distraction and pointed ahead. It was my mom again, standing at the top of the canyon looking down at us. We both yelled at her, but she didn't respond or even move. She just stared at us. We continued forward thinking maybe she couldn't hear us, and when we came around the next bend she was gone again. I was losing at this point. I'm not sure what I would have done if my uncle hadn't been there with me. We eventually made it back to the top of the canyon. It was indeed pitch black. There was no sign of my mom or anyone else. We were utterly alone in the dark desert hills. Luckily my uncle had a small headlamp that he brought with him, and we used that to start our slow trek back through the hills to the car, and hopefully to my waiting family. I can't explain to you how dark it felt out there. It felt like I couldn't see my hand from my face. The only thing keeping us on a somewhat path was the small beam of light from my uncle's headlamp. We had no camping or emergency gear. Stupid, I know, but we were able to find the small path we had come by on the way into the canyon and began following it back. After some time we made it back to the grove of fan palms. I'd be lying if I told you I wasn't terrified seeing those trees in the dark, just standing and watch over the path like ancient centennials. I remembered how I felt the first time we encountered the palms and how it felt like something was watching us through the fronds. I hesitantly followed my uncle through the trees. As we walked by there was a loud rustle from one of the trees, much too loud to be just a rodent or a reptile. My uncle swung the headlamp around on the trees, but there was nothing there. A few seconds later there was more rustling from the tree behind us. Again my uncle shined the headlamp at the tree, but it was completely still. It was at this moment that I felt something push me hard away from the palm I was standing in front of, and I crashed down into the dirt. I remember it felt like something had reached through the fronds and pushed me from behind, but I don't remember hearing any rustling even though I was so close to the tree. I was utterly freaked now and started yelling at my uncle that something had pushed me from inside the tree. My uncle went up to the tree with the headlamp and peered deep inside to see if he could see anything, but there was nothing. After that we quickly made our way out of the grove and continued through the hills back towards the car. Remember, it felt like forever walking through those hills in the complete darkness, and every once in a while I would hear rustling behind or to the side of us, but there was no way to know what it was with no light. The whole way I felt like something was following us through, trailing just behind us, outside the light where we couldn't see it, but I could feel its presence. Finally we made it through the hills and were about to traverse back down to the car. In the distance we see a faint light coming towards us. As we get closer it was apparent that the light was coming from someone, the flashlight, and me and my uncle were nervous whether this individual was there to help or harm us. Given the position we were in, however, we decided to make our way to the light, and thankfully it was a border patrol agent who was actually out looking for us. The agent had come across my family who were waiting for me and my uncle in our car, and my parents told them that we were still out there. The agent then went looking for us. The agent led my uncle and I back to our car, where my terrified mom rushed to hug me and scold my uncle. We then told my mom that we had seen her at the top of the canyon and asked her why she didn't respond to us or wait for us to get to her. I will never forget that sinking feeling I felt in my stomach when my mom told us she had never gone any further after her. My dad and my sister turned back and left me and my uncle to go on alone. She said they had been waiting in the car for hours for us to return. I don't know who or what me and my uncle saw in that canyon, or what was inside those fan palms, but I know for certain we were not alone out there that night. Maybe it was all just our minds playing tricks on us, but it's been 14 years now, and I still think about it to this very day.